Kadosh, Boker Tov. We're going to be continuing with Masechet Pesahim Daf Ayin, which is Daf 70, but we're going to be starting on the Mishnah Daf Samachet Mubet on the bottom of 69b. There, the Mishnah is talking about a Korban Chagiga. Now, there's two different types of Korban Chagigas. The first type of a Korban Chagiga is the regular Chagiga, which you have to bring on Shalosh Regalim, which means every single one of the three holidays, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, you have to bring a Korban Chagiga. Now, there's another Korban Chagiga, which was going to be called the Korban Chagiga of the Arba'asar, which is basically the Korban Chagiga of the 14th of Nisan, which was a special din. It has nothing to do with the regular Korban Chagiga that you would bring on the Pesach, Shavuot, and the Shalosh Regalim. It's a special din. So it says, this is Chagigat Arba'asar. So it says over here like this. The Mishnah says, Ematai mevi Chagiga imo. When do you bring a Korban Chagiga, which is again the Chagiga Arba'asar, the 14th, the Chagiga of the 14th, on with the Korban Pesach, Bizman shehu ba bechol, or when it comes out during the weekday, Betahara, when the Kahal and the Kohanim are pure, and they're doing the Pesach, the Korban Pesach in purity, Uvemuat, and when there's very little with meat, which means that there's not enough meat for all the people that are in the group, so they have to bring a Korban Chagiga, which we'll explain in the Gemara why. Now, says the Mishnah, Ubizman shuba b'Shabbat, bimrube uvetuma. If it's going to now happen that when it comes out on Shabbat, which means the 14th of Nisan comes out on Shabbat, like this year, the 14th of Nisan comes out on Shabbat, which means the Pesach is Motzei Shabbat. Bimrube, if there's a lot of meat, or betum'ah, or it's going to be that they are impure. In such a case, en mevi'in imo chagiga. You do not bring this extra korban chagiga with it, and we'll explain why in the Gemara. Okay? Now, obviously, if you want, we could just say it right now. On Shabbat, the reason why you don't bring it if it comes out on Shabbat is because only the korban Pesach is doche Shabbat, as we learned at the beginning of the Perek, but not the Korban Chagiga. This Korban Chagiga does not push off the Shabbat. The reason why, if there's a lot of meat, because you don't need it, because basically the reason why you're going to bring this extra Korban Chagiga was lechol et ze ala sova, to eat it when you're satiated. Here, right now, if you already have a lot of meat, you don't need an extra Korban for that. And the last one is Tum'ah, is because only the Korban Pesach was Tum'ah Utra B'tzibur, but not the Chagiga is not going to be Hutra, right, because of the Tum'ah and the Tzibur. Next part of the Mishnah, Chagiga itaba min hatzom, min habakar, min hakavasim, min haizim. This Korban Chagiga is be able to be brought from sheep, cattle, right, or goats, and it's not like the Korban Pesach, because the Korban Pesach can only be brought from the sheep, and it cannot be brought from the cattle. The same thing, min hazecharim, min nekevot. This Korban Chagiga could be brought from males or females. The Korban Pesach could only be brought from a male, right? And this is going to be eaten like a regular Korban Shlamim, which is basically 2 days and 1 night, okay, which is basically the day of the 14th, the night of the 15th, and the day of the 15th. So you have, again, it's being done on the 14th, so it's the 14th, the night, and then the 15th. So that's 2 days and 1 night, okay? But not like, that's like a Korban Shlamim. Any peace offering is also Shnei Yamim v'Layla Echad. That's what we read in Korbanot. But not like the Korban Pesach. The Korban Pesach is only going to be eaten on the first night of Pesach. On the 14th, meaning the night of the 15th, which is the night after the 14th during the day of Pesach, that night of the night of Pesach, that's when you eat the Korban Pesach. So says the Gemara, Maitana diktani chagiga. What is the reasoning why we're mentioning this Korban Chagiga? What's the connection? What does this have to do with anything? Who's talking about now Korban Chagiga that's wrong with the Korban Pesach? So says the Mishnah, says the Gemara, Tana al-kavato v'avato de lo dachi Shabbat. Since we mentioned in the previous Mishnah Daf Samechet Amud Bet, we mentioned there the bringing the Korban Pesach on the shoulders, right, to bring it to the Azrad through a public domain, and bringing it from outside of the Tchum, which is Hava'ah. Since we mentioned over there that it does not push off the Shabbat, so therefore, since it's derech hagav, that means just like those things do not push off the Shabbat, so too the Korban, this Korban Chagiga does not push off the Shabbat. So this is what it means to say. When do we bring the Chagiga? Right? In these 3 cases. So Amar Ravashi says, Shema Mina, from our Mishnah, we actually learn Chagigat Arba'asar, the Chagiga of the Arba'asar. Now we're starting Again, the daf of Daf Ayin, Daf 70, Amud Aleph. Lav chovahi, it's not a chova. Why is it not a chova? Because if you just told me right now in our Mishnah, 3 cases where you do bring it and 3 cases where you don't bring it. So it's not an obligation. But if you're going to tell me it's an obligation, Teiti b'Shabbat, bring it even Shabbat. Or Teiti b'Ruber, even bring it if it's always, even if there's a lot of meat. Or Teiti b'Tumah, or bring it even if it's going to be in Tumah. Elama, from here, the fact that we said in these 3 cases you do not bring it, so it's not an obligation. So says the Gemara, Uvmuat mi'umay tamatya. He says, why be'emet you bring it only when there's so little meat? So says the Gemara, answers Kedetanya, as we learned in the Braita, Chagiga ba'im Pesach nechelet chila. When you bring this Chagigat Arba Asar, you have to actually eat it first before the Korban Pesach. You eat the Korban Pesach. Why? Kedeshia Pesach nechal ala sova. That's what we actually say in the night of Pesach. Zechele Korban Pesach nechal ala sova. The Korban Pesach always had to be eaten not on an empty stomach. It had to be eaten after you're satiated. So now, if you don't have a lot of meat at the Korban Pesach, so now how are you going to eat it when satiated? So first you have to eat another Korban, which is the Chagigat Arba Asar, and then they come and they divide the Korban Pesach to everybody, and now there's going to be enough for everybody, and everyone's eating it when they're already satiated. Okay? Fine. The next part of the Mishnah, we say here in the 2 dots, it's going to be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. So says the Gemara, so our Mishnah is not like Ben Tema. Why? The Tanya was learned to the right of Ben Tema Omer, Chagiga ba'im Pesach, which is again the special Chagigat Arba Asar. It's not the regular Korban Chagiga. A lot of people will come and when they learn Masechet Beitzah, there's a Korban Chagiga. There it's a special din of a Korban Chagiga, nothing to do with this, right? Because there it's brought on Yom Tov in itself. And if you don't bring it on Yom Tov, you have Tashlumin for the 7 days, or on Sukkot, you even could bring it on the 8th day. Here it's a completely different korban chagigat arba asar. Remember that it's a completely different korban. So it says over here, Ben Tema says a chagiga which is brought with the korban Pesach, which is called chagigat arba asar. Harehi ke Pesach. It's like the korban Pesach. Ve'ena ne'echelet el yom v'layla. So according to Shita Ben Tema, this chagigat arba asar is not like a regular korban shlamim. They have 2 days and 1 night, but rather what is it? It's like the Korban Pesach, the same laws. Since it's brought with the Korban Pesach, the same laws as the Korban Pesach, right? Which is what? Yom V'Layla. You eat it during the night of the night, the first night of Pesach, and also, right, Belel Rosh Rishon, and he says also the day. Okay, so now it says over here, okay. So he says, okay, even though he says here liyom v'layla, which is a day and night, it's lav davka for the day, it's only the night, meaning it has the exact same din as the nighttime. But chagigat chamisha asar, now the chagiga which is brought on the Yom Tov itself, which is again, this is now the other chagiga that we mentioned, which is the korban chagiga, the regular korban chagiga, a regular korban, which is the korban which is brought on shalosh regalim. Ne'echel lishnei yamim v'layla echad. V'chagigat arba asar, Yotze ba mishum simcha, ve'en yotze ba mishum chagiga. Which means like this. Now all of a sudden, Ben Tema comes and he has another halacha. And he says the chagigat arba asar, if you did not bring it on Erev Pesach, but rather you brought it on Pesach itself, and you did the shechita on the first day of Pesach, you are going to be yotze chova mishum simcha. But you're not going to be yotze chova mishum chagiga. Which means that you have the shalmei simcha. On Yom Tov, you bring shalmei simcha, which is basically we want you to eat kodesh, we want you to eat meat on Yom Tov. Okay, so you are going to be yotzei chova with eating this meat from this korban, even though it wasn't brought for shalmei simcha, but you are going to be, right, b'kayem this mitzvah. Okay, but he says over here, right, the klal is, the general rule is that any korban chova is not brought from chulin. Right? It says this animal, since it was already hugdash for another korban, for another sacrifice, you are not going to be tzechova for the chagiga chamisha asar. Which means like this: you have to bring 2 different chagigot in this case. The chagiga on the 14th, which is supposed to accompany the korban pesach, and the chagiga the 15th, which is the regular din of shalosh regalim. What happens is that you didn't bring it on the 14th, you brought it on the 15th, and you wanted to kill, right, a bird with 2 birds with 1 stone. You want to say, oh, I'm doing it together. Says Ben Tema, you are yotzei chova mishum shalmei simcha, but not mishum lechagiga. Since this was already consecrated for chagigat arba'a asar for the 14th, and it wasn't going to be for the 15th, you're not Yotzei Chovah because of the Chagigah of the 15th. But you are going to be Yotzei Chovah Mishum Simcha, meaning if you're eating meat, you have Simcha. So you're going to be Yotzei Chovah. What's the reasoning of Ben Tema that he says that it's only going to be eaten for one night, right? And not like a regular Korban Shlamim. Just like Rav Chia taught to his son, what does that mean that you don't want to leave over? What does it say, Zevach Chag Pasach? Right? What does that mean? It's extra. Just say, Velo Yalin Laboker Pesach. Don't leave over in the morning the Pesach. Remember, the Korban Pesach was eaten at nighttime. There's a machloket, is either eaten until Chatzot or until Amud HaShachar, right? If you remember, there we speak about it. That's why the Fikomen also is the same concept. Until when do you have to actually eat the Fikomen? So he comes and says the Gemara, Zevach Chag. What does it mean, Zevach Chag? Ze Chagigav Chagigat Arba Asar. HaPasach is the Korban Pesach. The Amar Rachman and the Torah says, Lo Yalim. Lo Yalim means you're not allowed to leave it over. So you see from here, Mefurash in the Torah, when it says the Pesach, it's Mamash Korban Pesach. When it says Zevach Chag, it's the Arba Asar. Chagigav the Arba Asar, the 14th. So you see from here, Lo Yalim, you're not allowed to leave it over. So therefore you only have the nighttime. So that is the Shita of Ben Tema. Why does he say that the Chagigat Arba Asar is not like a regular Shlamim that you have 2 days and 1 night to eat it? You only have the night of Pesach to eat it. From here, he learns it from the Pasuk. So says the Gemara, so they're going to ask now the question, Ben Tema, according to Ben Tema, Ne'echelet Sali, right? That means just like the Korban Pesach is only eaten, it cannot be eaten raw, cooked, or it has to be eaten sali, roasted. So too this Chagigat Arba Asar has to be eaten in sali, has to be eaten roasted. Or maybe it doesn't need to, and you could even cook it. Why? Since we made a kesh, a juxtaposition, the close proximity between the Korban Pesach and Chagigat Arba Asar, which means you have the Korban Pesach and the Chagigat Arba Asar brought together. So just like I put them together that you could only eat it in the same night, I have to eat it the same way, the same fashion, which is basically only roasted. Or maybe no. It's only to do with when do you eat it, but you could eat it however you want. So we're going to try to answer this question now. So again, remember, the question is, can we eat it? Do we need to eat it roasted, or we could eat it in any form? This is the Chagigat Arba Asar. Because the Korban Pesach, according to it's written in the Torah, you have to eat it roasted. So we're going to try to answer this question. Tashema, we're going to try to bring a proof. It says, Halayla ze kulot sali. We say, Man ishtana halayla ze mikol lot. Shebechol halelot anu b'sar sali shaluk u'mushal. Halayla ze kulot sali. The entire night, everything is roasted. Ve'amar Rav Chasta, says Rav Chasta, Zodivre Ben Tema. These words are the words of Ben Tema. So therefore it comes out that according to Shitat Ben Tema, the Chagiga is like the Pesach. So he says that also the Chagigat Arba Asar, which is like the Pesach, has to be eaten sali, has to be eaten roasted. Shema Mina. So this is actually going to be a good proof. So it's going to be a good proof that what? That the Chagigat Arba Asar, not only is it only going to be eaten one night according to Ben Tema, it has to be eaten roasted. There's no other way to eat it. So now they're going to ask Ben Tema, according to Ben Tema, Ba Mina Bakar or Ena Ba Mina Bakar, which means just like the Pesach cannot come from Kivasim or Yizim, cannot come from the sheep or the goats, right? So it says over here, and it has to come from and also, or for example, Ba Mina Nekevot and Ba Mina Nekevot, Ba Bat Shte Shanim or Ba Bat Shte Shanim. Basically like this, by the Korban Pesach, it has to be the 1-year-old. It has to be a male. And it has to be a sheep. It cannot be goats. It cannot be females. It cannot be more than 1 year old. So basically, now the Gemara is going to go into the next safek. If you're already coming and comparing, right? Again, one more time. You are comparing the Korban Pesach with the Chagigat Arba Asar, the Chagigat of the 14th, which is coming with the Pesach. And we already learned 2 halachot, which are like the Pesach. It has to be roasted, plus that it only has the same night to eat it, not like a regular shlamim. So now I go to the next safek. According to Ben Tema, can it come from a female? But if you're comparing it to Pesach, it has to be a male. Or can it come from a 2-year-old? All right. Or it has to be like a Korban Pesach, like a 1-year-old. Or can it come from all the other goats? Or it has to come from a sheep. So says the Gemara, when I come and you're making a juxtaposition to Pesach, meaning, since you said in the Pasuk, Zevach Chag is referring to the Chagigat Arba Asar, and Pesach is Korban Pesach. Since you put them together, so it means that not only are you not allowed to leave them over, it has to be eaten the same night. It has to be eaten also tzali, but also it has to, all the halachot apply to each other, right? Which means everything that we just mentioned now as well, which means that it cannot be more than 1 year old, it cannot be a female, it cannot be anything other than a sheep, right? Or dima lo shno, maybe bemet it's not. Do we say that there's a difference or not? So we're going to try to answer this one as well. Tashema, we're going to try to bring a proof. Chagiga ba'im Pesach, the Chagigat Ba'asa, which is brought with the Pesach, harei ke Pesach, it's like the Pesach. Ba min hatzon, ve'ena ba min hakar. It comes from the sheep and not from the cattle. Ba min hazecharim comes from the males, ve'ena ba min hakavod, not from the females. Ba bat shnata, only a 1 year old, ve'ena ba bat shnata, not if it's a 2 year old. Ve'ena ne'echelet ela liyom v'layla, it could only be eaten for the same day. Ve'ena ne'echelet ela tzalin, it could only be eaten roasted. And it can only be eaten by the people that are subscribed to it, that they are appointed within that group. Who's the one that holds all these svarot? Bentema. So according to this is actually a proof that according to Bentema, it's exactly like the Korban Pesach. When I'm going to compare them, all the similarities, all the comparisons, they're all together. Okay? So now ask the Gemara, there's now a third suffix now. In Bentema. Lebentema, according to Bentema, Yeshba Mishum Shvirat Etzem. Is there an Isur of Shvirat Etzem? When we just read Parashat, this past Shabbat was Parashat Beshalach, the one before was Parashat Bo. So by Parashat Bo, it's written over there, Ve'etzem lo yishviru bo, which means Tishviru bo, which means you're not allowed to break one of the bones of the Korban Pesach. The Chinuch actually explains over there the reason why is because he wanted HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to be like kings. Breaking bones is like a poor man's thing. He wants us to act like Melachim, to act very high, like hierarchy. So therefore, it says over here, are you going to tell me then that just like there's an Averah that you're not allowed to break the bones of the Korban Pesach, so too you're not allowed to break the bones of the Chagigat Arba Asar, or not? Yesh ba mishum shvirat etzem, or en bo mishum shvirat etzem. Afal gav de'ak sherachman al Pesach. Do we say that even though he compared it to the Korban Pesach, Amakra the pasuk says ve'etzem lo tishbiru bo, which means only the Korban Pesach, ve'lo bechagiga, not the Chagiga. Or Dilmar, maybe I'm going to say, hi bo, this word bo is bibasar, velo bipasulu data, which means that maybe the word bo doesn't come to exclude the chagiga, but rather it comes to teach you that this din is only in a korban pesach, which is kasher, but not a korban pesach, which is a korban which is pasul. For example, if it became tameh, which means that if it became tameh, you're allowed to break the bones. So it says, and therefore this negative commandment, right? This negative commandment of shvirat etzem, of breaking the bones, is also in a chagiga. So we're going to try to bring a proof. Tashema, we're going to bring a proof. Sakin shenintzeh barba asar. Imagine right now you found the knife on the 14th of Nisan on Erev Pesach, and you don't know if the knife is pure or impure. Shocheb ba miyad. So what are you supposed to do? You're allowed to come and do it and do the shchita immediately, and you don't even have to do tevilah to the sakin, to the knife, because of a doubt. Okay? Now, what happens is that this is only if it's going to be on the 14th. So you found a knife, you don't know if it's pure and impure, you're allowed to do shechita immediately. You don't have to do any, you don't have to wait, you don't have to purify it. No, you do it immediately. However, though, if it was going to be b'shosha asar on the 13th of Nisan, even though it's a safek that maybe they already put it into the mikveh, shoneh umatbil, you're going to put it again in the mikveh. Why? Because maybe it wasn't done. Right? Now, however, though, it says over here, if you found the kofitz, which is basically a very big knife, and the majority of the sakinim are for cutting meat and for breaking bones, and it's not done for shchita, which means it's a much bigger knife, so it's not done for slaughtering, but rather for breaking bones. Ben bazeh uven bazeh, whether it's on the 14th of Nisan or the 13th of Nisan, shoneh matbil. You have to actually come and you have to do tevilah to it. Why? Because since you're not allowed to break the bone of the Korban Pesach, right? So it comes out that you don't need this big knife on the 14th. So therefore, maybe they didn't come and put it into tevilah. So therefore, since you have enough time to do it, so you come and you put it into the mikveh and then you wait until the next day, right? So Mani, who is this? Who's this Braita that speaks about this Mishnah here? It's a Mishnah in Shekalim. So Ilema Rabbanan, if you're going to tell me now that it's the rabbis, the Shitat Chachamim, that they hold a Chagigat Arba Asar is not like the Korban Pesach. So Mashna Sakin de Matpil de Chazil Pesach. So why is it that the Sakin that to do with Tevilah, which is fitting for the Korban Pesach? Right? So he says, Kofitz nami chazil chagiga. The kofitz, you could use it for the korban chagiga, because according to this shita, the korban chagiga, you're allowed to break the bones. So why can't I use this kofitz that I just found, use it for the korban chagiga? Again, we're talking about the chagiga of the Arba Asar, of the 14th of Nisan. So he says, Ella, but rather love, the bentemahi. Obviously, it has to be dealing with ben tema. So you want to bring a proof from here that he holds that also by the korban chagigat arba esrei, you're not allowed to break the bones, and therefore, if you found this big knife, the kofitz, which break bones, you're not allowed to use it even on the 14th. So says the Gemara, it's not a proof. Lo, why? Leolam rabbanan. Really, Bemet, I'm going to say it's the rabbis. Okay, which means that there's no hekesh, there's no juxtaposition from the korban chagigat arba to the Pesach, so you could break the bones. But kigon Shabbat b'Shabbat. But what happened was that the 14th fell out on Shabbat. So since the 14th fell out on Shabbat and you found this kofitz, remember the kofitz cannot be used, which is a big knife, which break bones. It can't be used for the korban Pesach according to everybody. But it's written in the Torah mefurash lo tishbru bo. You cannot break it. So what can it only be used for? Chagigat arba asar. We already learned that you don't bring the chagigat arba asar on Shabbat because it's not docheh the Shabbat. So since it came out on Shabbat, it's not going to push it off. V'hamiditani seifa, and that which we learned in the seifa, chal arba asar liot b'Shabbat shochet b'miyad. If it comes out on Shabbat, you're allowed to do shechita immediately. V'chamisha asar, and if it comes out on the 15th, which means if you found the kafitz on Yom Tov itself, right, shochet b'miyad, you're allowed to use it immediately. And if you found the kofitz tied to the sakin, so it's got the same dinim in the sakin. Meaning, if you found both knives together, the shechita knife and the knife of the kofitz, which is a bigger knife used for breaking bones, so it has the same laws as the knife, the regular knife. Miklal dereisha b'Shabbat askinan. So it's mashma that if the seifa was talking about that if it fell out on Shabbat, the former part of the Mishnah was not dealing with it came out on Shabbat. So what are you trying to answer me that this is also going in accordance to the rabbis, right? It's not true, right? Because what did you say? You said it's also going to according to the rabbis, but it's talking about on Shabbat. So therefore, when you found this kofitz, this big knife that breaks bones, it doesn't help you because anyway you can't do the shechita on chagigat arba asar on Shabbat because it's not brought on Shabbat. It doesn't push off Shabbat. But he says, but here we're talking about the seifa was talking about Shabbat, not the former part of the Mishnah, the latter part only. Ve'ela, but rather. Kesheba, we're on Daf Mubet 70b, Bimrubeh, when you have a lot of people. So since you have, not a lot of people, you have a lot of meat. So since you have so much meat, you don't need to bring the Korban Chagigat Arba Asar, if you remember. But since you have so much meat, you don't need to bring it. For what? There's so much meat, everyone's going to eat the meat. They're going to be satiated anyway, just from the meat of the Korban Pesach. They don't need another Korban with it. So Menayade, how do we know that this kofitz, right? How do the owners know that this kofitz, right, was be'emet, is going to be shayach to somebody that has such a small group or a big group? Ve'ela sheba betuma, but rather you're right. It cannot be a big group or small group. It's, you find it. Maybe my group is big, maybe my group is small, and every group is going to be different. But rather, really be'emet, we're talking about sheba betuma, which means the majority of the tzibur are tmeim. They're impure. Okay, so therefore, since they're going to be impure, so therefore again they do not bring the korban chagigat arba asar because it's only pushed off the korban pesach betuma when the majority of the tzibur are going to be tmeim, but not the korban chagigat arba asar. So says the Gemara, so sof minayadeh. How do the owners of this kofitz are going to know that the majority of the tzibur are going to become tmeim? How do they know this? So says the Gemara, demit nasi. What happened was the nasi of the Sanhedrin, he passed away, and therefore since there's a mitzvah of everybody, right? This is a mamash, one of the biggest gdolim. So since right now there's a mitzvah to come and to take care of the funeral, of the burial, so for sure the majority of the tzibur, they went to bury him, and therefore they all become tamim. So the majority of the tzibur are tamim. You're allowed to bring the korban pesach, but there's not going to be a korban arbaat asra chagigah of the arba asra because again it doesn't push off because of the tumah. So says the Gemara, demit nasi emat. When did the nasi die? If you're going to tell me that the nasi died on the 13th, sakin lamilin mitbile. So why do you have to actually do tevilah on the sakin, right? It's known that Pesach is going to come betuma, and it's going to be permitted to do shechita with the sakin tmeah. So why do they have to put it into the mikveh? Vela, but rather, temit barba asar. He had to die on the 14th. So maishna sakin de matbil, umaishna kofitz de lo mebile. So why is it that you only have to do the tevilah then on the sakin and not on the kofitz? Remember, the sakin is a shechita knife. The kofitz is the one that breaks bones. Okay, so what's the difference then, right? If you're going to tell me then that it could be coming betara, so therefore the same thing. So if it's how to do this, also you should put it also in tevilah. So answers the Gemara, lotzicha denasi goses v'shosha asar, v'sakin dechad sfeika matvile, kofitz tres sfeika lo mitbile. He says no. Really, be'emet, the nasi was already a goses on the 13th. Goses means that he's going to die. And what happens is, everyone knows that he's going to probably die. And what happens is that they're going to have to bring a betuma. So for the sakin, there's only one safek, because maybe the nasi will die, and then the majority of the tzibur are going to be tmeim, and maybe he's not going to die, and then they're going to do a betara. So because there's only one safek, we're going to say that for sure the baalim, the owners, they put it into the water to make it tahor, because maybe he's not going to die, and then they're going to have it pure. But by the kofitz, there's two sfekot. What are the two sfekot? There are two sfekot that maybe be'emet the nasi will die, and maybe because of the tumah, they're not going to bring the chagigat arba asar. And even if he's not going to die, right, maybe it's going to be a chabura muetet, a very small one, and they're not going to bring the chagigat arba asar with the Pesach, right? So therefore it says, because there's going to be enough meat, so they don't need to bring the korban chagigat arba asar. So because of the two different doubts, and maybe you won't need to bring the chagigat arba asar at all, the kofitz, right, that's what we're saying over here, that the kofitz in itself, in such a case, the kofitz in itself, that there's two sfekot, you have to come and you have to do the tevilah. However, though, when it's going to be the case of the one safek, which is basically the knife, then you do have to do the tevilah. Okay, so that's why we said the sakin, which is chad sfeika, you do the tevilah. The kofitz, which is two sfekot, you don't do the tevilah. Tanya, we learned in the Braita, Yehuda bar Dartotai Piresh, who? So what happened is that this person, right, his name was Yehuda ben Dortatai. He was Piresh. He separated himself from the Chachamim. Vedurtai beno, right? Why? Because they used to say that the Korban Chagiga, right, the Chagigat Ba'asar was not pushing off Shabbat, and according to him, it does, right, push off the Shabbat. Ve'alach v'yashav lo badarom. So what did he do? He went to the south, right, the south of Yerushalayim. Right, this is the year that it did come out, in order not to do aliyah l'regel and not to be obligated in the korban pesach and the chagiga. But according to him, he would be obligated to bring the korban chagigat ba'asar, and he can't do it. So Amari said, "Im yavo Eliyahu v'yomar lahem liYisrael mipnei ma lo chagavtem chagiga b'Shabbat." If Eliyahu Navi is going to come and he's going to say to the Jews, why is it that they weren't doing a chagiga b'Shabbat? Right? What are they going to tell Eliyahu Navi? Tama'ani al shnei gedolei ador Shmaya v'Avtalion she'hem chachamim gedolim. I'm going to be astonished in Shemaya v'Avtalion that they're chachamim gedolim and they're big darshanim. And what? They didn't tell anybody that the korban chagiga is doche the Shabbat. So Amar Rav comes and he says, "My tama de ben dortai." What's the reasoning of ben dortai? Tichtiv, as it says, "V'zavachta Pesach laHashem lokecha tzon v'kar," right? Which means that you're going to come and you're going to bring korban Pesach, right, to Hashem your God, tzon v'kar. You could only bring Pesach from a keves or an ez, right, which are sheep. So from the sheep, right, from those things. So why does it say bakar then? Right? Son uvakar. Elatzon is a Pesach, and bakar is a chagiga. And the Rachman says, V'zavachta Pesach. So this is a proof that the chagiga is also called a korban Pesach, because it says bakar, and we know that the Pesach cannot be a bakar. Pesach, right, the Pesach has to be a sheep. It cannot be a bakar. It cannot be a cattle. So therefore, this obviously is a proof that this is the korban chagigat, the arba asar. This is being brought. So he comes and he says, right, chagigat arba asar. So he comes, Amar Rav Ashi, and now Rav Ashi is going to come and try to answer up on the drasha of Rav. So explains Rav Ashi, Va'anan tama de prushim niku v'nifrosh. Well, we have to start explaining the different reasonings of the people that go against the rabbis. Yehuda ben Dortai and his children. But rather the pasuk is coming to teach us the shita of Rav Nachman. Why? When it says sonu vakar, what is it coming to teach you? The Amar Rav Nachman Amar Baravua says of Nachman Rabba Baravua, how do we know that if right now a person separated for a korban pesach and it got lost, and you brought another one, what do you do with the first korban, with the first sacrifice, with this first sheep? Right? Or for example, you consecrated money, it became money for Korban Pesach, and then there was leftover money because the value went down of the sheep, and now you're able to do it. So it says, what are you going to do? Can it come from the bakar? It can only come from the sheep. It has to come like a Korban Shlamim. A Shlamim can come from Tzonu Bakar, whether it's going to be a male or a female. So therefore, everything which is a leftover Pesach, whether it was because it got lost and then you had to bring another one, or because the value went down and now you were able to have leftover money, that money or that new one or the old one that you just got lost has to be used as a Korban Pesach. Rabbanana, according to the rabbis. My Tama, now we're going back to the Shita Chachamim. Why isn't it that the Korban Chagigat al Ba'asar does not push off Shabbat? For Rabbana, my Tama lo dechi Shabbat. Havadai Korban Tzibur. It's a Korban Tzibur. So Amar Rabbi Yila Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Safra Amar Ka. It says in the pasuk Chag LaHashem Shivat Yamim Bashana. Shiva. What do you mean? It's only 7 days. Shmona Avu. When it says Chag, Chag is always Sukkot by itself. Sukkot is 8 days, not 7 days. It's Shmona. So this actually teaches you that the Korban Chagiga does not push off the Shabbat because it's only going to be during the 7 days and not during the 8 days. So Kiata Ravin Amar, when Ravin came and he said, sometimes you're only going to find 6 days that you could bring the Korban Chagiga. For example, Chal Yom Tov Rishon Shel Chag on Shabbat. So now you only have 6 days because the first day you're not allowed to bring the Korban Chagiga. Second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And then by the time the 7th day, which is going to be the 8th already, because remember, the first day was the day of Yom Tov and Shabbat, so you couldn't bring it then. So it's already Shmini Atzeret, you can't bring it. So he comes and he says, Amar Abaye comes and he says, Avin takala lema ki aminta. Rabbi Avin, right, he's going to, that his children passed away during his lifetime, he's going to say such a thing. Shmona lo mashkacha laklal, you will never find it with 8 days. Right? Shiva ita b'rov, but the majority of the years you will have it in 7 days. Why? Because at the end of the day, the majority of the years it doesn't come out on Shabbat. It happens in the minority of years. So since you go, it's only the minority of the years. That's why you're only doing that way. And Bezrat Hashem, we continue with the next daf. Bezrat Hashem. Have a wonderful day.